On today's reaction, we have a disaster story, and the tagline of it is the terrifying story behind the deadliest plane crash in history. It's from a channel called Disaster Stories, so if you like this video, then go and subscribe to them and me, because it helps us both out. Anyway, let's check it out. Okay, when I looked at the disaster stories, it did say that this happened in Tenerife. I've just been to Tenerife. I'm glad I didn't watch this before then. Right, okay. The terrifying story behind the deadliest plane crash in history. Let's see what happens.
On March 27, 1977, 644 passengers looked forward to a wonderful vacation in Gran Canaria, one of the Canary Islands in Spain. Flight KLM 4805 was on its way to Las Palmas de Gran Canaria Airport.
Right.
However, they could not guess that an unexpected stopover on Tenerife, another island of the Canary Islands group, would lead to one of the most terrible air disasters in...
Look at that! That's not just a crash, is it? That is an obliteration. Wow. Wow.
Island of the Canary Islands group would lead to one of the most terrible air disasters.
You knew I was an Aries? I'm not an Aries, I'm a Virgo. I said birth year, not birth month. By the way, for anyone who's confused, we're doing this on a live stream. That's okay.
Disasters in history. The KLM Tenerife disaster involved not one, but two loaded Boeing 747s.
Two planes.
The first flight was KLM 4805, a charter flight from Amsterdam. This flight carried a total of 235 passengers,
wow,
including 52 children and
wow,
14 crew members. The second flight was Pan Am 1736, which had departed from Los Angeles and made a stopover at JFK Airport in New York. This flight had a total of 380 passengers on board, including 16 crew members. Most of them were Americans. The flights, KLM 4805 and Pan Am 1736, flew smoothly at cruising altitude, and there were no problems with both aircraft during the flight.
Okay.
The first incidents that led to the tragic chain reaction occurred on the ground at Tenerife Airport.
On the ground?
On March 27, 1977, at 1:15 in the afternoon, a bomb suddenly exploded in the terminal of Gran Canaria Airport.
What?
8 people were injured, but fortunately no...
A bomb set off by the Canary Islands independence movements at Gran Canaria caused many flights to be diverted to Los Rodeos. That's not how you say it. Including the 2 aircraft involved in the accident. The airport quickly became congested with parked airplanes blocking only a taxiway and forcing departing aircraft to taxi to the runway instead. Patches of thick fog were drifting across the airfield, so visibility was greatly reduced for pilots in the control tower. So this is some sort of movement, Canary Islands independence movement, right? So it's like people like who don't agree with something. But they shouldn't do it to an airport. That's not fair on the people who have to go land there.
No one lost their lives. This explosive had been detonated by an organization known as the Canarian Independence Movement. It was a group that was out for the independence of the Canary Islands. After this explosion, the Gran Canaria Airport was temporarily closed, leaving all incoming flights to the island with nowhere to land.
Wow.
Ground control ordered all flights to divert to Tenerife Airport. KLM 4805 immediately followed this order. However, the Pan Am crew informed ground control that they had enough fuel to circle safely in the air for another 2 hours. In retrospect, this proved to be a wise decision, but the crew was eventually ordered to divert to Tenerife as well.
Right.
Both flights came in at Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife. However, Los Rodeos was a relatively small airport, especially given the unexpected influx of diverted traffic, including both of these Boeing 747s and 3 other large aircraft. It simply did not have the facilities to handle it safely. The airport had only 1 runway and 1 large taxiway, which further complicated the situation.
Right.
All of the diverted air traffic was able to land safely at Los Rodeos Airport. However, because of the limited space and facilities at the airport, several aircraft had no other choice than parking on the main taxiway. This situation created a challenge because the main taxiway was blocked, leaving no free taxiway for aircraft to position themselves for takeoff. So to prepare for takeoff, these aircrafts had to use the runway to position themselves, which further complicated the situation and contributed to the tragic series of events that followed. While waiting at Los Rodeos Airport.
So it's basically carnage down there. You know, everything's blocked up, everything's backed up. So there's not a lot of room to land your plane.
The KLM captain, Jakob Louis Waldheisen von Santen, decided to take advantage of the time and refuel his aircraft, even though this was not the planned procedure. While refueling, the Gran Canaria airport was reopened. This allowed the Pan Am aircraft to take off. Unfortunately, due to the KLM captain's decision to refuel, there was no space for the Pan Am flight to maneuver around the KLM aircraft. As a result, the Pan Am aircraft had to wait about an hour until the KLM aircraft had finished refueling and all passengers were back on board before it could take off. It was an absolute mess at Los Rodeos Airport, but no one was hurt and everything seemed to be getting back to normal. After the KLM aircraft was ready to depart, the ground controller instructed the captain to taxi onto the runway and make a 180-degree turn to put the aircraft in the correct position for takeoff. Once the aircraft was in the designated takeoff position, the crew gave the controller ATC clearance, which meant that they were ready for takeoff. After the KLM aircraft had positioned itself for takeoff, the Pan Am aircraft was instructed to make the same maneuver. After making a 180-degree turn on the runway, the Pan Am aircraft had to leave the third available taxiway to make room for the KLM aircraft. However, the Pan Am crew had difficulty understanding the message and asked for clarification. The tower operator repeated the instruction to exit via the third taxiway. "The third one, sir. 1, 2, 3, third one," the controller responded. But the exits were not marked, so the crew had to guess which taxiway to use.
So they're going to have to guess. There's a bit of like, you know, taking people's lives into your own hands sort of thing. If you're unsure, I'd be like, if you're unsure, I wouldn't even move the plane. I won't move it. I wouldn't even go to the taxi. I'd be like, I don't understand what you're saying. Tell me properly because I've got like 300 people on my aeroplane here. This, you know, it could have been avoided. It's like that Mr. Boland story where they tried to land it blind when they got people on the plane and they shouldn't have done it. You know what I mean?
Responded. But the exits were not marked, so the crew had to guess which taxiway to use. They successfully found the first exit and continued on. Exit 2 was also found and bypassed. However, conversations recorded from the cockpit showed that the crew was unable to find the third exit.
That's true.
That's 45, yeah?
Yeah?
That's this one right here.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Poor weather conditions, including heavy fog, limited visibility at Los Rodeos Airport on that day. No one could see where the Pan Am aircraft was. They kept driving on, but could not find the exit. As a result, they accidentally missed the third exit, causing the Pan Am aircraft to taxi through on the runway. They were totally unaware of what was about to happen.
What happened to, if it's foggy, you don't go anywhere? Like proper ground fog. You don't go anywhere, especially in a situation like this where all the planes have been grounded because of this like bomb that's gone off in somewhere else. And they've all had to go to the same place where they're not supposed to be. And the airport's not big enough for the planes. All these planes that's parked up that's on the airport, if this was actual footage, have all got 2 engines. All these Boeings have got 4 engines, a bigger plane, bigger span, bigger everything. And if it's foggy, like I say, I'd have just left my plane where it was. When the fog clears, then we'll do it. You know what I mean? It's too dangerous, this.
Result, they accidentally missed the third exit, causing the Pan Am aircraft to taxi through on the runway.
Nestlin.
They were totally unaware of what was about to happen. Meanwhile, the KLM aircraft had turned around and was ready to take off. The captain accelerated and asked ground control for permission to take off. Ground control then gave the captain detailed instructions for the flight path after takeoff, but did not specifically authorize takeoff. When the KLM pilot heard the word takeoff, he told ground control that they were going to take off.
Miscommunication.
The ground controller responded with OK.
Roger, sir. We're clear to the Papa Beacon flight level 90. Right now, 04 until intercepting the 325, and we're now taking off. Okay.
Which in the mind of the KLM captain meant that they were cleared to take off. However, this statement had been misinterpreted. The ground controller thought that the KLM captain had said he was ready for takeoff, not about to take off.
Oh, no.
This miscommunication, coupled with poor weather conditions, meant that the captain and ground controller had completely different interpretations of what was happening. To be on the safe side, the ground controller told the KLM captain to stand by for clearance. But at the same time, Pan Am's captain reported over the radio to ground control that they were still taxiing down the runway. Because both operators were speaking at the same time, interference made it impossible to understand what was being said.
You never know if both planes have heard the same person say take off, do you? So they've both gone to the runway together or something. Oh, is that what happened?
Interference made it impossible to understand what was being said. The KLM captain was completely in the dark. He had missed the ground controller's instructions to stand by. He had missed the Pan Am captain's plea to stand by. In his mind, everything was going to plan, and he was ready to take off. There was one more communication before the unthinkable happened. Ground control asked the Pan Am crew to report when they were clear of the runway. This gave the KLM plane's flight engineer a worrying thought, and he asked the captain if the runway was clear. The captain assured the engineer that the runway was clear, and continued.
But how can he assure him? How can he assure that the runway is clear when it's foggy? Should never have got to this stage.
The runway was clear. The captain assured the engineer that the runway was clear, and continued with the takeoff. However, he was wrong. Very wrong. The Pan Am captain was the first to realize what was happening. All of a sudden, he saw headlights in the distance, but they quickly came closer and closer.
Yeah, because the plane flies fast.
Before he could even blink, the nose of the KLM plane was in his view. There was nowhere for the Pan Am craft to go. Desperately, the pilots went full throttle into the nearby grass in an attempt to avoid the KLM plane that was fast approaching. On the other side of the runway, the KLM captain could not stop until it was too late. As soon as they saw the Pan Am aircraft, the pilots attempted to pull up sharply to avoid the Pan Am aircraft, but they pulled up too fast, causing the tail of the plane to hit the runway. The nose of the KLM aircraft did avoid the Pan Am aircraft, but the left side of the aircraft hit the Pan Am's right.
Look at that. You know, I know this probably is a reconstruction because obviously there may not be footage of it back then. But look at that. This is, if this was an accurate reconstruction, the engines have hit two sections of that plane. Wow. Can you imagine being on that plane? Can you imagine seeing that coming towards you?
Did avoid the Pan Am aircraft, but the left side of the aircraft hit the Pan Am's right side. The KLM aircraft's left engine was completely destroyed on impact. Pan Am's aircraft sustained severe damage in the collision. The main cabin was completely destroyed by the collision with KLM's left engine, and the upper deck was also hit by the engines on the right side.
Wow.
Given the extent of the damage, it was clear that it would be a miracle if anyone aboard the Pan Am aircraft survived such a devastating collision. After the collision, the KLM aircraft remained in the air for a short time, but the extensive damage to the engines and wings prevented the aircraft from continuing to fly. The plane soon stalled, descending rapidly, and crashed to the ground within seconds. Given that the plane was fully refueled, this caused a huge fireball,
explosion,
which could only be extinguished after hours. Within moments, the unthinkable had happened, something that you would normally expect to see in a movie. It was a shocking disaster that no words could describe. The captain of the Pan Am plane, Captain Victor Grubbs, was one of the survivors. He escaped from the plane along with the first officer and flight engineer, together with about 67 passengers. Many of the survivors, including Captain Grubbs, exited the plane via the left side and used the left wing as a bridge to get to safety on the ground. But help did not come quickly. Somehow the engines of the Pan Am were still running for several minutes after the crash, increasing the risk of another catastrophic disaster. Unfortunately, the pilot was unable to turn the engines off because most of the cockpit was completely destroyed by the collision. The survivors waited and waited for assistance. The delay was compounded by a misunderstanding among firefighters.
Oh, God, it is an absolute comedy of errors because now you've got the firefighters who've got a confused message. You've got the obviously the planes. I mean, the fog. You shouldn't have gone out. You shouldn't have tried to do this in the fog. Oh my God, this is horrible. This is horrible. And I don't like flying. I'm feared to death of flying, and watching things like this, I shouldn't really bloody watch them because then it makes me worse.
For assistance, The delay was compounded by a misunderstanding among firefighters who initially thought that only the KLM aircraft had been involved in the crash. As a result, their primary focus was on extinguishing the flames from the KLM aircraft, so they belatedly realized that 2 aircraft had been involved in the collision.
Wow.
Help eventually came, and most of the survivors survived their injuries. The number of victims is heartbreaking to hear. All 248 passengers aboard the KLM plane lost their lives, either from the initial collision with the Pan Am aircraft or from the subsequent crash. In the Pan Am aircraft, there were 335 casualties, and initially, there were 70 survivors. However, 9 of these survivors later succumbed to their injuries, bringing the total number of fatalities to a heartbreaking 583 and 61 survivors.
You can see why it's the worst crash in history, can't you? Because it's not just one plane, it's 2 planes. It didn't even get up. You know what I mean? Well, it got up a little bit, but obviously not enough to avoid the plane. These are all the actual footage in the actual newspaper from the time. Wow. Wow, 550 dead.
One of the 61 survivors of the Pan Am flight said that sitting in the nose of the aircraft most likely saved his life. We all settled back, and the next thing, an explosion took place, and the whole port side, left side of the plane, was just torn wide open. So what on earth was the cause of this horrific crash that is forever etched in history? Well, there were 3 main factors that played a role in this disaster: weather, communication, and the third exit error. First, the weather clearly played a massive role in this series of events. Because of the terrible fog, no one could see each other until it was too late.
They shouldn't have moved.
The KLM aircraft had no idea where the Pan Am aircraft was, and vice versa. On top of that, ground control had no idea what was happening in real time. In fact, they were working with false interpretations of the 2 aircraft. No one knew what was really going on. This was coupled with terrible miscommunication. Let's not make the mistake of blaming one party. Communication was bad on both ends.
Yeah.
On the ground control's end, it's clear that they were overly ambiguous with their instructions. It could have been easily interpreted that the KLM plane had been cleared for takeoff, and because this was a detour, it's easy to see why the captain was eager to jump on this opportunity to take off and get back on schedule. However, communication was equally as...
And there's rushing as well, isn't there? Eager to do it, eager to do this. I mean, I know it's not his fault entirely, because he's just a guy who wants to get his plane going again and get back on schedule. But, I mean, you've got to take a certain amount of precautions when everything is as messed up as it is. Like you say, you know there's another plane out there and you don't know where it is. No one's confirmed to you that it's gone into the 3rd exit and it's missed it. You're in the fog and you're like... You heard that recording then. That wasn't easy. I'd have been like, you know what? Forget this. Park the plane up now. Just go to the next exit. Park it up. Wait for the fog to go. Everyone will just have to wait, and then we'll go. You know what I mean? It's better than trying to rush it out and, you know, cause an incident like this. Could have been avoided. Absolutely could have been avoided.
This was a detour. It's easy to see why the captain was eager to jump on this opportunity to take off and get back on schedule. However, communication was equally as poor on the side of the KLM captain. It's also clear that he was overly ready to take off and get back on schedule, and overlooked the safety procedures and unclear communication as a result. Had he waited just a few moments longer, the correct instructions may have been relayed properly, and the entire incident could have been avoided. There was also extraneous communication issues that were simply no one's fault. The fact that radio interference prevented the KLM captain from hearing the instruction to hold steady, and the cry of the Pan Am captain that they were still on the runway, is clearly just terrible luck. Had the radio system been better, we could have easily not been talking about this disaster. Finally, the ground control's instruction for the Pan Am aircraft to exit the runway at the 3rd exit was a huge factor in this disaster. Reports have labeled that due to the zigzagging nature of this exit, it would have been impossible for the Pan Am Boeing 747 to actually exit the runway. So even if the exits were labeled and the overall communication was better, the Pan Am aircraft would still have been stuck on the runway.
Yeah.
Immediately after the crash, an investigation was launched. The transcript of the communications between the ground team and the KLM pilot was analyzed, and investigators concluded that the main cause of the accident was because of the KLM captain's decision to take off without adequate clearance.
Look at that, they're throwing the shit around here. They're saying, oh, we'll blame him because he was too eager to take off. It's nobody's fault in the tower, the people who are still alive. We'll blame it on this guy. That's what it looks like to me. Scapegoating somebody.
Was because of the KLM captain's decision to take off without adequate clearance. Several other factors were also mentioned. For example, it was emphasized that the airport was overcrowded as a result of the attack that took place in Gran Canaria. The investigation into the Tenerife airport disaster also delved into various human factors before the crash. For example, it was suggested that the KLM crew may have been in a hurry to take off to avoid exceeding their legally allowed duty hours for the day. In addition, a communication problem was created because...
So, to save hours, their flying hours or whatever it is that it's supposed to do in a day, they've put everyone's life at risk as well. So there is a little bit of fault there, but that's what they're saying. They're saying it's because of that. Maybe, sorry, because of that. So are they saying it's a comedy of errors? We'll take a little bit of the blame, but we'll mainly say it's him because he was in a rush.
Duty hours for the day. In addition, a communication problem was created because the ground control team referred to the Pan Am aircraft as Clipper 1736 instead of Papa Alpha 1736, which was the call sign used by air traffic controllers during the final transmission.
Right.
This miscommunication contributed to the confusion in the critical moments before the collision. Finally, they investigated in detail why the flight engineer did not encourage the captain to stop the takeoff. According to several aviation sources, investigators concluded that nothing was said because the pilot was so experienced and the engineer and crew did not feel competent enough to challenge him. The captain had reassured all crew members that the takeoff would be safe. This is a common
experience. Just because you've flown so many fights, just because you've been so many places, just because you've flown so many planes, etc., doesn't mean you can make a dangerous decision and get away with it because you're experienced. You know what I mean? If I'd have been one of them crewmates, I'd been, listen, mate, look at that. Look at the fog. No one's been cleared. Pull your thing back. I don't care what you say. That's what I'd be saying. I don't care if I was serving butties in the back. That's what I'd be saying to him.
Experienced, and the engineer and crew did not feel competent enough to challenge him. The captain had reassured all crew members that the takeoff would be safe. This is a common practice in aviation where the captain, as the most experienced and highest-ranking crew member, often makes critical decisions, and the other crew members rely on their expertise and judgment. The Dutch government was not so cooperative with the investigation. They did not believe that the KLM captain was the root cause of the disaster. Instead, they claimed that the Spanish control tower crew had been distracted by a game of football instead of concentrating on their duties.
Oh.
This was a very large allegation, but lacked substantial evidence. Moreover, they also claimed that blame should have been placed on the Pan Am crew, who had not left the runway at the correct point. These arguments were ultimately unconvincing, and the Dutch authorities eventually took the blame for the incident. KLM paid huge damages to the victims' families, an average of $189,000 per victim. Of course, no amount of money can ever make up for what the families of the victims lost that day, but it was at least respectable to see the company try to compensate for its mistake. As a result of this absolutely heart-wrenching accident, major changes were made across the aviation industry to ensure that history would never repeat itself. Primarily, air traffic control communication was completely rethought. Rules were amended so that simple phrases like "okay" could no longer be deemed sufficient clearance. The word takeoff can now only be used when takeoff clearance is actually given or canceled. Planes ready on a runway must also now be told to hold position before being given clearance. Standard cockpit procedures were also completely changed to ensure that the captain would not be the only person making the decision. It's clear that the captain of the KLM aircraft made the wrong call, but because he was the captain, no one second-guessed him. This procedure was changed so that now there is an emphasis on mutual agreement during the decision-making process. If a member of the crew is not sure of the captain's decision, they are encouraged to express their concerns. New crew resource management training has also been introduced to prevent arbitrary decisions from being made without question. The Spanish government also installed a new ground radar system at the airport to ensure that nothing of this sort would ever happen again. Ultimately, the KLM Tenerife disaster is considered possibly the worst accident in human history. It is nothing short of heartbreaking to think of all those individuals who lost their lives. Individuals who were expecting to go on holiday, to have a great time with their families. Individuals who had jobs, hobbies, co-workers, husbands, wives, and children. But it also seems that this accident could have so easily been avoided.
Yeah, that's what I said.
The weather was bad, and the airport was extremely overcrowded. But should the KLM captain have not erred on the side of caution? Should the radio system not have been more advanced to ensure that miscommunication didn't...
Should they not have erred on the side of caution? That's what I said.
Should the radio system not have been more advanced to ensure that miscommunication didn't happen? Perhaps this accident was just an amalgamation of several minor accidents all occurring at the wrong place and the wrong time. If that organization hadn't bombarded the airport, maybe everyone would have been okay. If the Dutch government hadn't tightened working time regulations, maybe the crew wouldn't have been so eager to take off without following the correct safety procedures.
That's a lot of what ifs.
Either way, we must hope and pray that something like this will never be repeated again. Thanks for watching this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on your notification bell to stay updated on more similar videos. We would love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share your comments below. Until next time.
That was just a massive, massive catalogue of errors, and it all boils down to human error. A bit of impatience as well, and, you know, I mean, all the what ifs are saying, like, oh, if that independence group hadn't bombed this, then they would have all gone to the respective airports. Well, that's true, obviously. But there's nothing they can do about that. They have to go to an alternative airport, so they have to go. So they land. But if it's foggy, I'm like that, me. I'd be like, no, I'm not. You know, I'm not even moving till the fog's gone. I'd be like that. You know what I mean? It's like, can't see what's in front of you. If you're unsure where the other plane is and you've not got confirmation that it's got off the runway, then you don't move. Don't move. What a horrible, horrible, horrible story. But the only plus side to that is every time there is an air crash or something that goes wrong with the plane, things get learned. I think it makes everything safer, you know, for the next time or the next era of air travel, if you like. But I mean, wow. That didn't even get to take off, and it was just an unfortunate crash. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Anyway, what did you guys think? Let me know in the comments, and if you like my videos, then please hit like and subscribe, and I shall see you all on the next video.